The Mitford family is an interesting one. They were once one of the most prominent families in history. Now that they're the most talked about and controversial families in history, believe it or not. So, there were communists, fascism, Nazis, one traitor, and even one lesbian sister, all living in Britain. And even one immigrated to the US just to get away from her family. Now, how did the most prominent family come to be known as one of the most controversial families? Well, on this episode of history, I am going to be talking about the patriarch of the Mitford family, David Freeman-Mitford. Okay? And this was a family I discovered a few years ago, so I was like, you know what? Let's talk about this on People of History, because they are part of history. Very controversially part of history, but they're part of history. But David was born David Bertram Ogilvy Freeman Mitford. He was the second Baron Resdale, and he was a British peer, soldier, and landowner. He was best known for being the father of the Mitford sisters. Now, we gotta talk about their early life a little bit because, one, they take great pride in knowing their origins. And the Mitfords were a family that were the landed gentry, originally from Northumberland, whose history dates back to the 14th century. And Resdale's great great grandfather was the historian William Mitford. Resdale was the second son of Algernon Bertram Freeman Mitford, who was the first Baron Resdale, and his wife Lady Clementine Gertrude Helen Ogilvy, who was daughter of David Ogilvy, the 10th Earl of Airlie, and his father was a diplomat, politician, and an author, who also inherited estates in Gloucestershire, Oxfordshire, and Northumberland. And he was raised in the peerage in 1902, so his son became known as the Honourable David Mitford, as David was commonly known as the surname Mitford by itself, and not the full Freeman Mitford. But his legendary eccentricity was evident from an early age, and as a child he was prone to sudden fits and rages, and he was also uninterested in reading and education. He wished to only spend his time reading, and he later liked to boast that he had read only one book in his life, Jack London's novel White Fang, on the grounds that he enjoyed it so much that he vowed to never read another. He did, however, read most of his daughter's books. And his lack of academic aptitude meant that he was not sent to Eton with his brother, but rather went to Radley, and with the intention that he should enter the army. However, he failed the entrance exam to the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst, and was instead sent to Cian to work for a tea planter. Let's talk about now. In the early 1900, he returned to England from Zealand. On May 23rd, 1900, he joined the Northumberland Fusiliers as a second lieutenant, and his battalion served in the Second Boer War in South Africa. It was where Mitford soon joined in the fighting, and it was in which he served as a distinction and wounded 3 times, losing 1 lung, and he was briefly taken prisoner by the Boers in June 1900, but escaped. In May 1901, he was appointed aide-de-camp to Lord Matroon, a senior commander during the war, and on August 5th, 1901, he was promoted to lieutenant. He was seconded to serve with the 40th Company of the Imperial Yeomanry and returned to the UK in April 1902. After his return, he was back as a regular lieutenant in his regiment in July 1902. He resigned from the army 3 months later in October 1902. In February 1904, he would marry Sidney Bowles, and whom he met 10 years previously. And when he was 16 and she was 14. Now, she was the daughter of Thomas Gibson Bowles, who was a journalist and conservative MP. who in 1863 had founded the magazine Vanity Fair. Now we know. And in some years, um, the woman, the woman's magazine for the lady. Now, for a time, his father-in-law employed him as a manager at the lady, but Mitford showed no interest in it or talent for the work, and he traveled regularly to Canada, where Mitford owned a little gold claim near Swastika. Still cannot believe there is a town in Canada called Swastika. Seriously, what the hell? So, no gold was ever found, but he enjoyed the outdoor life. His daughter Unity stated that she was conceived in Swastika and shared that fact with Hitler upon becoming one of his British confidants. On the outbreak of the First World War in 1914, Mitford joined the Northumberland Fusiliers, and he was commissioned as a lieutenant and served as the logistics officer in Flanders. Um, Being mentioned in dispatches for his bravery in the Second Battle of Ypres. Now with only one lung, and by now captain, he was invalid out of service. Upon his father's death in August 1916, being now Lord Rasdell, he was briefly appointed Provost Marshal of Oxfordshire, with responsibility of ensuring the enlistment of new recruits in 1918 and 1919. He served as a grounds officer with the Royal Air Academy as Lord Resdale, and he was often silent in the House of the Lords, but joined the House of the Lords Select Committee on Peerages and Abians in 1925. Although Resdale was now a large landowner, he was not a wealthy man, and these estates were poorly developed and rents were low. With 7 children to feed and 5 servants to pay, he could not maintain expenses in the large home at Batsford and Cosworth. He bought and extended Astor Hall, and then eventually moved to nearby Swinbrook. And he indulged his passion for building new large house he named after the village, which appears as the family's home in the books and the daughters of Nancy and Jessica. And the expense of these early, nearly ruined Resdales, who had poor manager. This plus the increasing disappointment that all his later daughters were girls led to the deterioration of his temperament, and he later became legendary through the portrayal of his frequent and terrible rages. Now, he was a conservative peer, and he was also a hereditary member of the House of Lords, and he would attend sessions consistently, but had little interest in legislation except for being opposed to nearly all progressive changes. In the 1930s, however, his wife developed a strong sympathy for fascism and was favoring Neville Chamberlain's appeasement toward Nazi Germany. His daughter Jessica, a communist from her teenage years, would describe him as one of nature's fascists, but never joined any fascist parties. His eldest daughter Nancy, who was anti-fascist and a moderate socialist, but not as left wing as Jessica. So, now, the father of his wife Sidney was Thomas Gibson Bowles, and he had been one of the strongest parliamentary supporters of the Royal Navy while he was an MP. And his maternal uncle, William Evans Gordon, was a retired British Indian officer who was opposed to the uncontrolled immigration into Britain and was allied with the British Brothers League and helped enact the Alien Acts in 1905. Resdale was an instinctive xenophobe and came back from the First World War with a dislike for the French and deep hatred for Germans, as Uncle Matthew, who had served as model for Resdale, put in his daughter Nancy's 1945 The Pursuit of Love as well. Now he was initially scornful and his of enthusiasm shown by his daughters Diana, Diana and Unity. Now keep in mind, Diana was the wife of British Union of the fascist leader Oswald Mosley. Unity for some reason, was a Nazi who loved Germany, and Adolf Hitler. However, the pro-German sympathies emerged from the mid-1930s. In 1937-1938, Lord and Lady Resdale attended the annual Nuremberg rallies as guests of the German Nazi Party. And in 1938, the Resdale accompanied their daughters to Germany, where they met Hitler when Unity and Diana were already acquainted, but the Resdales were immediately won over by Hitler's charms, but in his admiration for the British Empire. Resdale spoke in the House of Lords in favor of the Austrians of Austria and of returning Germany's colonies, and he had even had a strong support of Chamberlain's policy of the appeasement toward Germany. Now, Lady Resdale went further into writing articles in praise of Hitler's support of National Socialism. At the outbreak of the Second World War in 1939, precipitated a series of crises in the Mitford family. Resdale, above all, was a patriot and soon declared by Chamberlain a recant of his support, recanted his support for Hitler, and once again became violently anti-German. And he explained his views to the Times in 1940 as well, stating that his only crime, as he knows, was that I was one of many thousands in this country who thought of the best interest would be to serve a friendly understanding with Germany. He would declare, I am not a fascist. Now, you're probably wondering, Lady Resdale would stick to her pro-Nazi sympathies, and as a result, the pair would become estranged. They were separated in 1943. Unity was in love with Hitler, attempted suicide in Munich, and she was even rumored to be his affair partner as well. She suffered severe brain damage, which you have to be if you're going to be in love with Hitler. If she was brought home, as an invalid, and Lady Resdale cared for her until her death in 1948. Diana and Oswald were interned in May 1940 as a security risk and spent 3 years in prison. After their release in 1943, Jessica's husband, Esmond Romilly, was lost in his aircraft over the North Sea during a raid in Germany in 1941. This deepened her bitterness toward the fascist branch of the family. Jessica never spoke to her father again, and although she reconciled with her mom in the 1950s, Jessica did not speak to Diana again until 1973, although they remained permanently estranged from due to their continuing strong political beliefs. Now David and Sydney had 6 daughters, 1 son. There is Nancy, Pamela, Thomas, Diana, Unity, Jessica, and Deborah. Now, later in life, in 1945, his son Tom was killed in action in Burma. And already depressed by his breakup of his marriage, he never recovered. And Resdale retreated to the Inchkenneth, an island in the Inner Hebrides of the west coast of Scotland, where he purchased in 1938. He later moved to the Resdale Cottage in Northumberland, and his family, which was his family's ancestral property, and he lived there like a virtual recluse. In 1950, when Nancy visited him, he was frail and old, and he died at the age of 80 in 1958. And he was buried at St. Mary's Church in Swinbrook, where 4 of his daughters, Nancy, Diana, Unity, and Pamela, were also later buried. His title would pass to his brother Bertram, who became the 3rd Baron Resdale. Now, you heard me mention Uncle Matthew. Well, let's talk briefly about that. He is mentioned as Uncle Matthew, in Nancy's novel, The Pursuit of Love, in a Cold Climate. In a typical passage, he would be called what's the word I'm looking for? Cold, basically. And, yeah, excuse me. But that is it for this episode. You can join me next time as we finish up season 1 and we talk about Sydney, his wife Sydney. All right, y'all have a great day and enjoy yourselves.